Begin. Honored guests, participants and organizers of the conference. Please let me now welcome our very special guest, Professor Karen Barad, who will give the promised keynote lecture for us. Dear Karen, I would like to express my personal thanks for accepting my invitation and for your presence among us today. We all appreciate it very much, and we are looking forward to your talk. This part of the meeting today will be moderated by Adam Lipschitz, Professor of Philosophy at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Adam, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Pavel. Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to share this bit of the conference, as it is my great both honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Karen Barad, whom I guess most of the people in the room know, but let me introduce them briefly. Karen Barad holds PhD in physics and is now a distinguished professor of feminist studies, philosophy, and history of consciousness at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And they specialize, as many of you know, again, in feminist science studies, new materialism, critical posthumanism, and many other fields. And Barad is famously the author of the book published in 2007, Meeting the Universe Halfway, I would say, path-breaking and breathtaking book. That again, most of the people in the room would know, as I understand, most of the people in the room are interested in rethinking agency, and this is what is being done in this breathtaking work, which offers a astonishingly lucid and astonishingly bold reading of quantum physics through most interesting and most advanced feminist and political philosophy of the time, and vice versa, offering ultimately a extremely coherent and extremely brave in consequences and far-reaching in consequences ontological stance dubbed agential realism, and offers a number of fantastically, I would say, fantastically thought-provoking concepts such as diffraction, interaction, apparatus, agential cuts, and a version of new materialism. A book that has been of much influence on many fields and dimensions of humanities, new humanities, and post-humanities, you name it. It's really hard to find anybody whose presence and thinking would be more relevant for our conference today. The talk, as you know, I hope, also is titled "What Flushes Up: Errant Wonderings and Wonderings: The Materiality of Imagining, the Imaginings of Materiality." Now we'll have the talk, and we'll hear the talk, I hope, now from Professor Barad, and after that we'll have a Q&A session. I'll remind it later, but I'm telling you now already that if you want to ask a question, please inform me in the chat section that you want to do so. If you don't feel like talking, but rather you feel like writing, it's also an option that you can write your question in chat and then I'll read it out. But if you feel like raising the question in person, please do so. So let me welcome Professor Barad now, and please, the stage is yours now. The floor is yours. Well, the virtual floor.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Adam. And thank you, Powell, for inviting me to give this keynote address at this wonderfully rich conference. I want to extend my warm thanks to all the organizers for putting together a very large conference such as this. Takes an enormous effort and its enormous support team. So, and I also want to thank and welcome all of my over 100 co-speakers at the conference. So I'm delighted to be here today, and we will chat after the talk. Thank you. What flashes up? Errant wanderings, wonderings, the materiality of imagining, the imaginings of materiality. My talk today revivifies a paper of mine called Transmaterialities, Trans/Matter/Realities, and Queer Political Imaginings, published in GLQ in 2015. I've decided to reanimate it today because my sense is that this moment is thick with longings for what I'm calling an energetics of the otherwise, for sensing, imagining, and connecting with newfound energies, not in ways that ignore the piling up of violence upon violence, but on the contrary, in a way that attends to the sparking up of energies within the debris, for thinking and connecting and caring otherwise. By my lights, this is in the spirit of the theme of today's conference. This talk is a bit longer than I'd like it to be for a Zoom talk. At least this talk, with its seemingly disparate parts, is shot through with the electrifying connectivities of luminous imaginaries. Even if some parts of it flit by all too quickly to grasp, I hope it will energize you, exploding settled ideas, sparking fresh imaginaries, and enlivening collective channels of valuing that are in touch with the charged desirings of what is alleged to be nothing in a racialized economy based on individualism and its concordant metaphysics of fixed, propertied, bounded entities of given kinds. Before I begin, I want to say a few words about my interaction with, or perhaps I should say, intimate reworkings of quantum physics. When I speak about quantum physics, some people mistakenly think I am giving over the standard account, but that is far from the case. First of all, there is no single account of quantum physics. There are many competing, indeed contradictory interpretations. And if someone talking about quantum physics can't name which interpretation they are using, you may want to be skeptical about what they're saying about it, because all too often it's a grab bag of counterintuitive ideas from multiple interpretations that don't cohere. Whenever I'm talking about quantum physics, I'm invoking my agential realist interpretation of quantum physics. In Meeting the Universe Halfway, I offer a new interpretation of quantum physics, one that begins with and further elaborates Niels Bohr's insights about quantum theory, but also takes seriously and takes into account insights from social and political theories. That is, social and political as well as physical forces in their inseparability. This agential realist interpretation of quantum physics goes against the grain of not only Newtonian physics and metaphysics, but also its entanglements with colonizing projects of empire building and racialized capitalism. The work that I've been doing includes tracing the forces of violence that exist within the physics down into its very equations, into the grammar and logics of the theory. And furthermore, I rework the physics, putting forward an alternative physics that includes a rethinking as well of the problematics entailed in what gets called the relationship between science and society, putting forward a rethinking of the practice of science that is attuned to questions of injustices and responsibilities, together with the rethinking of power relations as forces, fields of relations that are specifically entangled and therefore inseparable from one another. I also want to be clear that everything I say about particles, which is a typical object of quantum physics, I mean about bodies or matter at all scales. That is, I am not speaking analogically when I engage with questions of the political or social. In my particular agential realist interpretation of quantum theory, there is no fixed or given scale, no micro and macro realms. It's not that scale is irrelevant, but rather that scale, like matter, is iteratively materialized. That's part of what's at stake for me when I speak of space-time mattering, rather than the separate notions of space and time and matter. For these very terms, so important to philosophy and political theory, as well as physics, are reworked in the alternative physics I'm giving over. On my account, phenomena cut across what we usually think of as geometrical scales. For example, the coronavirus is not simply a microscopic bit of matter. Rather, on my agential realist account, the coronavirus is an entanglement of many diverse phenomena across the usual sense of scale, including all the apparatuses of bodily production and their historicities that are materially inseparable from what we think the virus is, including racialized capitalism, imperialism, militarism, colonialism, and more. One more comment before I begin, which has to do with the slash that appears in my writings, and in fact also in my title for today, between wondering and wandering. Sometimes I just skip saying the slash. Sometimes I actually say slash. And sometimes I do a kind of funny emphasis where something like im/possibility. So if I go impossibility, then that really has a slash between the im and possibility. And what I want to emphasize is that when I use a slash, it's not an and it's also not an either or of the terms. What I'm really talking about is cutting together a part of the terms involved. So with that, I will now begin my talk. Electrifying origins, flashes of things to come. A dark sky, deep darkness, without a glimmer of light to settle the eye. Out of the blue, tenuous electrical sketches scribbled with liquid light appear, disappear, faster than the human eye can detect. Flashes of potential, hints of possible lines of connection alight now and again. Desire builds as the air crackles with anticipation. Lightning bolts are born of such charged yearnings, branching expressions of prolonged longing, barely visible filamentary gestures, disjointed, tentative, luminous doodlings. Each faint excitation of this desiring field is a contingent and suggestive inkling of the light show yet to come. No continuous path from sky to ground can satisfy its wild imaginings, its insistence on experimenting with different possible ways to connect, playing at all matter of errant wanderings in a virtual exploration of diverse forms of coupling and dis/connected alliance. Against a dark sky, it is possible to catch glimmers of the wild energetics of indeterminacies in action. This is an experimental talk on matter's experimental nature, its propensity to experiment, to test out every im/possibility. Matter is promiscuous and inventive in its agential wanderings. One might even dare say imaginative. And imaginings, at least in the scientific imagination, are clearly material. Like lightning, they entail a process involving electrical potential buildup and flows of charged particles, neurons transmitting electrochemical signals across synaptic gaps and through ion channels that spark awareness in our brains. This is not to suggest that imagination is merely an individual subjective experience nor a unique capacity of the human mind. On the contrary, what is at issue here is the nature of matter and its agential capacities for imaginative, desiring, and effectively charged forms of bodily engagement. This talk explores the materiality of imagining together with the imaginative capacities of materiality, although it does so less by linear argumentation than by the zigzag disk/continuous musings of lightning. Electrical energy runs through seemingly disparate topics in what follows. This next section is called a striking phenomenon. Lightning is an energizing play of a desiring field. Its tortuous path is an enlivening exploration of possible connections, not a trail from the heavens to the ground, but an electrifying yearning for connection that precedes this and that, here and there, now and then. Lightning is a striking phenomenon. It jolts our memories, flashing images on the retina of our mind's eye. Lightning arouses the sense of the primordial, enlivening questions of origin and continuity. It conjures haunting cultural images of the summoning of life through its energizing effects, perhaps most memorable in the classic films Der Golem from 1920 and Frankenstein from 1931. And it brings to mind credible, if not uncontroversial, scientific explanations of the electrifying origins of life, nature's fury, shocking primordial ooze to life, an energizing jumpstart. Lightning makes luminous connections between science and imagination. It also electrifies our imaginations and our bodies. If lightning enlivens the boundary between life and death, if it exists on the razor's edge between animate and inanimate, does it not seem to dip sometimes here and sometimes there on either side of the divide? Shocking brute matter to life, what makes us think that matter is lifeless to begin with? Galvanism inspired both Mary Shelley and her famed protagonist. Shelley was fascinated by the experiments of her contemporary Luigi Galvani, a physician, anatomist, and physiologist who, while preparing dinner on his balcony one stormy night, the atmosphere crackling with electrical buildup, noticed something uncanny that would change through the course of his scientific studies. As he touched the frog's legs strung out on a line before him with a pair of scissors, they twitched. Thereafter, he took it upon himself to study in a systematic fashion the spark of life, as Shelley referred to it. Galvani concluded that electricity was an innate force of life, that an animal electricity pervaded living organisms. It was a short leap from there to consider if the harnessing of nature's fury might be used to resurrect the dead in whole or in parts. In the introduction to Frankenstein, Shelley writes, perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. Even while Shelley labored to write Frankenstein, the scientific atmosphere crackled with controversy over the nature of the relationship between life and electricity. Bioelectricity was in the air, sparking the imagination of 19th century scientists. This next section is called Quantum Field Theory, nothingness as the scene of wild activities. Birth and death, it turns out, are not the sole prerogative of the animate world. So-called inanimate beings also have finite lives. Particles can be born and particles can die, explains one physicist. In fact, it is a matter of birth, life, and death that requires the development of a new subject in physics, that of quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is a response to the ephemeral nature of life. Quantum field theory was invented in the 1920s, shortly after the development of quantum mechanics. The first quantum field theory combined the insights of the classical theory of electromagnetic fields together with special relativity and quantum mechanics. Quantum field theory takes us to a deeper level of understanding quantum physics. It has important things to say about the nature of matter and nothingness, and the indeterminateness of their alleged distinguishability and separability. Quantum field theory is an alluring murmur of the insensible, the non-sensible, or the yet-to-be sensible of another sensibility within the sensible, a call to radically rethink the nature of being and time. According to quantum field theory, the vacuum cannot be determinately nothing because the indeterminacy principle allows for fluctuations of the quantum vacuum. How can we understand vacuum fluctuations? First, it is necessary to know what physicists mean by the notion of a field. A field in physics is something that has a physical quantity associated with every point in space-time. Or you can think of it as a pattern of energy distributed across space and time. For example, consider a bar magnet with iron filings sprinkled around it. The filings will quickly line up in accordance with the strength and direction of the magnetic field at every point. Now we add quantum physics and special relativity to classical field theory. When fields are quantized, the energy of the field is quantized, but energy and matter are equivalent. And so an essential feature of quantum field theory is that there is a correspondence between fields and particles, or energy and matter. For example, the quantum of the electromagnetic field is a photon, a particle of light. Now let's return to our question. What is a vacuum fluctuation? When it comes to the quantum vacuum, as with all quantum phenomena, ontological indeterminacy is at the heart of the matter, and no matter. Indeed, it is impossible to pin down a state of no matter, or even of matter for that matter. The crux of this strange non-slash state of affairs is the so-called energy-time indeterminacy principle. The point for our purposes is that an indeterminacy in the energy of the vacuum translates into an indeterminacy in the number of particles associated with the vacuum, which means that the vacuum is not determinately empty, nor is it determinately not empty. These particles that correspond to the quantum fluctuations of the vacuum that are there and not there as a result of the time-being indeterminacy relation are called virtual particles. Virtual particles are quantized indeterminacies in action. Virtual particles are not present and not absent, but they are material. In fact, most of what matter is virtual. Virtual particles do not traffic in a metaphysics of presence. They do not exist in space and time. They are ghostly non/existences that teeter on the edge of the infinitely fine blade between being and non-being. Virtuality is admittedly difficult to grasp. Indeed, this is its very nature. Virtual particles are not in the void, but of the void. The void is a lively tension, a desiring orientation towards being, becoming. The void is flush with yearning, bursting with innumerable imaginings of what might yet have been. Vacuum fluctuations are virtual deviations, variations from the classical zero energy state of the void. That is, virtuality is the material wanderings of nothingness. Virtuality is the ongoing thought experiment the world performs with itself. Indeed, quantum physics tells us that the void is an endless exploration of all possible couplings of virtual particles, a scene of wild activities. The quantum vacuum is more like an ongoing questioning of the nature of emptiness than anything like a lack. The ongoing questioning of itself, and indeed the notion of itself and it and self, is what generates, or rather is, the structure of nothingness. The vacuum is no doubt doing its own experiments with being, non-being. In/determinacy is not the state of a thing, but an unending dynamism. The vacuum is an extravagant, inexhaustible exploration of virtuality, where virtual particles are having a field day, performing experiments in being and time. This next section is called Electric Interlude, Virtual Touch. Touch, for a physicist, is but an electromagnetic interaction. A common explanation for the physics of touching is that one thing it does not involve is, well, touching. That is, there is no actual contact involved. You may think you are touching a coffee mug when you are about to raise it to your mouth, but your hand is not actually touching the mug. Sure, you can feel the smooth surface of the mug's exterior right where your fingers come into contact with it, or seem to. But what you are actually sensing, physicists tell us, is the electromagnetic repulsion between the electrons of the atoms that make up your fingers and those that make up the mug. Electrons are tiny negatively charged particles that surround the nuclei of atoms, and having the same charges, they repel one another, much like powerful little magnets. As you decrease the distance between them, say between the electrons that constitute the outer edges of the atoms of your fingers and those of the mug, the repulsive force increases. Try as you might, you cannot bring two electrons into direct contact with each other. The reason the desk feels solid, or the cat's coat feels soft, or we can even hold coffee cups or one another's hands, is an effect of electromagnetic repulsion. All we really ever feel is the electromagnetic field, not the other whose touch we seek. Atoms are mostly empty space, and electrons, which lie at the farthest reaches of an atom, hinting at its perimeter, cannot bear direct contact. Electromagnetic repulsion, negatively charged particles communicating at a distance, push each other away. That is the tale physics usually tells about touching. Repulsion at the core of attraction. See how far that story gets you with lovers. No wonder the Romantic poets had had enough. This next section is called Lightning, Responses to a Desiring Field. Lightning is an energizing response to a highly charged field. The buildup to lightning electrifies the senses. The air crackles with desire. By some mechanism that scientists have yet to fully explain, a storm cloud becomes extremely electrically polarized. Electrons are stripped from the atoms that they were once attached to and gather at the lower part of the cloud closest to the Earth. In response, the electrons that make up atoms of the Earth's surface burrow into the ground, leaving the Earth's surface with an overall positive charge. In this way, a strong electric field is set up between Earth and cloud, and the yearning will not be satisfied without the buildup being discharged. The desire to find a conductive path joining the two becomes all-consuming. The first inklings of the path have a modest beginning, offering no indication of the lightning bolt yet to come. It begins as a small spark inside the cloud 5 miles up, says one expert. A spurt of electrons rushes outwards, travels 100 meters, then stops and pools for a few millionths of a second. Then the stream lurches off in a different direction, pools again and again. Often the stream branches and splits. This is not a lightning bolt yet. These barely luminous first gestures are called stepped leaders. The lightning expert, Martin Uman, explains the animated inanimate relatings this way. What is important to note is that the usual step leader starts from the cloud without any knowledge of what the buildings or geography are present below. In fact, it is thought that the step leader is unaware of objects beneath it until it is some tens of yards from the eventual strike point. When awareness occurs, a traveling spark is initiated from the point to be struck and propagates upwards to meet the downwards moving step leader, completing the path to ground. What mechanism is at work in this communicative exchange between sky and ground when awareness lies at the crux of this strangely animated, inanimate relating? And how does this exchange get ahead of itself, as it were? What kind of queer communication is at work here? What are we to make of the fact that the existence of sender and receiver follows from this non-local relating rather than preceding it? Which strange causality is affected? Though far from microscopic in scale, it seems we are witnessing quantum communication, a process of iterative interactivity. Here you can see a streamer reaching up towards the step leader that's coming down. Okay, next section, back to quantum field theory, a touchy subject. How does quantum field theory understand the nature of matter? Let us start with the electron, one of the smallest particles, a point particle, a particle allegedly devoid of structure. Even the smallest bit of matter causes all kinds of difficulties for quantum field theory. For as a result of the time being indeterminacy, the electron does not exist as an isolated particle, but is always already inseparable from the wild activities of the vacuum. That is, it is always already interacting with virtual particles of the vacuum in all possible ways. For example, the electron, indicated by the black line in all three diagrams, the electron will emit a virtual photon, indicated in the middle diagram by a squiggly blue line. It will emit a virtual photon and then reabsorb it. This possibility is understood as the electron electromagnetically interacting with itself. This happens because a charged particle is both the emitter and receiver of its own electromagnetic field. Part of what an electron is then is its self-energy interaction. But the self-energy interaction is not a process that happens in isolation either. All kinds of more involved things can and do occur in this frothy virtual soup of indeterminacy called the void that we ironically think of as a state of pure nothingness. For example, in addition to the electron exchanging a virtual photon with itself that is touching itself, it is possible for that virtual photon to produce other interactions with itself. And now I want you to look at the bottom line. It can transform into a virtual electron. For example, the virtual photon, the squiggly blue line, can metamorphize or transition, change its very identity. It can transform into a virtual electron-anti-electron pair that subsequently annihilate each other and then morphs back into a single virtual photon before it is reabsorbed by the electron, and so on. This and so on is a shorthand for an infinite set of possibilities involving every possible kind of interaction with every possible kind of virtual particle it can interact with. That is, there is a virtual exploration of every possibility. And this infinite set of possibilities, or infinite sum of histories, entails a particle touching itself, and the particle that transmits the touch transforming itself, and then that touching itself, and transforming and touching other particles that make up the vacuum, and so on ad infinitum. Not everything is possible given a particular interaction, but an infinite number of possibilities exist. Every level of touch, then, is itself touched by and touching all possible others. Particle self-interactions entail particle transitions from one kind to another in a radical undoing of kind, queer/trans formations. Hence, self-touching is an encounter with the infinite alterity of the self. Matter is an infolding, an involution. It cannot help touching itself. And in the self-touching, it comes in contact with the infinite alterity that it is. Polymorphous perversity raised to an infinite power. Talk about a queer trans intimacy. What is being called into question here is the very nature of the self, and in terms of not just being, but also time. Excuse me. That is, in an important sense, the self is dispersed, diffracted through time and being, or indeed each bit of matter, each body is specifically entangled across beings and times, radically undoing the nature of self. Commenting specifically on the electron-self-energy interaction, the physicist Richard Feynman, who won a Nobel Prize for his contributions to developing quantum field theory, expressed horror at the electron's monstrous nature and its perverse ways of engaging with the world. Quote, instead of going directly from one point to another, the electron goes along for a while and suddenly emits a photon, and then horrors, it absorbs its own photon. Perhaps there's something immoral about that, but the electron does it, unquote. This self-touching term has been labeled a perversion of the theory because the calculation of the self-energy contribution is infinite, which is an unacceptable answer to any question about the nature of the electron. Apparently touching oneself or being touched by oneself, the ambiguity, undecidability, indeterminacy may itself be the key to the trouble, is not simply troubling, but a moral violation, the very source of all the trouble, says Feynman. The problem of self-touching, especially self-touching the other, is the perversity of quantum field theory that goes far deeper than we can touch on here. The gist of it is this perversity that is at the root of an unwanted infinity that threatens the very possibility of calculability gets renormalized. Obviously, should we expect anything less than making it normal again? How does this happen? Physicists conjectured that there are two different kinds of infinities, perversions involved in this case. One that has to do with self-touching and another that has to do with nakedness, with what's called the bare point particle. That is, with the metaphysical assumption we started with that there is only an electron, the so-called undressed bare electron, and the void, each separate from the other. Renormalization is the systematic cancellation of infinities, an intervention based on the idea that the subtraction of infinities can yield a finite quantity. The cancellation idea is this: the bare point particle is dressed by the vacuum contribution. The dressed electron, the electron in drag, that is, the physical electron, is thereby renormalized, that is, made normal or finite. By the way, I'm using technical language here, all except for my quip about drag. Renormalization is the mathematical handling or taming of these infinities. That is, the infinities are subtracted from one another, yielding a finite answer. Mathematically speaking, this is a tour de force. Conceptually, it is a queer theorist's delight. It shows that all matter in its essence, and of course that's precisely what is being troubled here, is shot through with perversities of all kinds, all matters of touching all matters of beings and all different kinds, wandering off straight paths, alighting here and there, now and then, as this and that. This next section is called The Body Electric. It's alive! Galvanism is alive and well in Medford, Massachusetts, where the biologists Michael Levin and Danny Adams of Tufts University have taken up the mantle of Dr. Frankenstein. Or if not that of the good doctors, then surely that of the famous frog electroanimator Luigi Galvani. Wedding galvanism to more mainstream contemporary biological endeavors like gene therapy, Levin and Adams have performed a series of experiments with electrifying results, for understanding developmental and regenerative biological processes. Regeneration is a capacity shared by all living creatures, but not equally. Flatworms can regenerate their entire bodies from a small bit of the original animal. Liver tissue regeneration is one of the few regenerative talents that humans have. Ecosystems can regenerate if they are not too badly damaged. Brittle stars, salamanders, lobsters, and other critters are famous for their ability to regenerate lost limbs. But something quite different is happening in the Tufts University lab, where regeneration has taken on uncanny new shapes. Let us take a tour through some of Levin and Adams' key laboratory experiments. Like Galvani, Levin and Adams have a fondness for frogs. Now, tadpoles can regenerate their tails, provided these are lost during the first 7 days of life. By day 8, right around the time the tadpole begins to metamorphose into a frog, it begins to lose that capacity, and at 10 days, the ability has gone completely. Remarkably, in a breakthrough series of studies on the effects of electricity on regeneration, Levin and colleagues showed that it was possible to get tadpoles to regenerate their tails outside the specified time frame by manipulating the electric fields around the missing tails. What accounts for this success? Levin's approach is to understand the genetic components that underlie bioelectrical events during the development and regeneration. This is Galvanism with a contemporary face. Levin and his colleagues have provided evidence that large-scale electrical patterning of bodily morphology plays a causal role in embryonic development and regeneration. This bioelectrical approach is unique in producing some electrifying results. As Levin explains, all cells, not just nerve cells, use bioelectrical signals to communicate pattern information to each other. You can tweak those signals artificially to get them to do what you want them to do, unquote. Taking things to the next level, researchers in Levin's lab took on the challenge of seeing if they could get body parts that are not normally capable of regeneration to regenerate by using the same techniques. Dr. Levin and his colleagues have been able to stimulate the regeneration of complete frog legs. Frog legs don't usually grow back like salamander legs, but by providing appropriate electrical gradient at the frog's wound site, these researchers stimulated the growth of an entirely new limb. Regeneration is one thing, but what about stimulating the growth of limbs, organs, and other body parts that have never been? Manipulating the bioelectric fields by changing various ion channels, the researchers were able to use the bioelectric fields to monstrous effects, growing extra heads, limbs, and eyes, four-headed planaria, six-legged frogs, two-tailed worms, and one bioelectrical mutation, which really caught the imagination of science reporters. An article titled "Franken Tadpoles See with Eyes on Their Backs" reports that using genetic manipulation of membrane voltage in frog embryos, biologists at Tufts University were able to cause tadpoles to grow eyes outside of their head area. This suggests that cells from anywhere in the body can be driven to form an eye. Not only that, it turns out that some of these monstrous eyes can see. But perhaps the most striking finding was the result of a combination of serendipity and Dr. Adams' scientific instincts. Dr. Adams had hooked up her research camera to a microscope to film the early stages of tadpole development and decided to leave the camera on overnight for the heck of it. Anticipating that the images would blur as the embryos moved, when she returned to her lab, she did in fact find that the images were blurry, but she was able to get surprisingly clear images after computer processing. She developed a time-lapse video using a sequence of photographs, and the results were jaw-dropping. The video, she says, was unlike anything I had ever seen. I was completely blown away. The images show an embryonic frog light show and fast forward. When a frog embryo is just developing, before it gets a face, a pattern for that face lights up on the surface of the embryo. We believe this is the first time such patterning has been reported for an entire structure, not just for a single organ. I would never have predicted anything like it. The face to come of the embryo flashes in electrical patterns across the surface of the embryo. It is important to take in the fact that the electric face appears and disappears before any actual features develop, that is, prior to cell differentiation. Quote, apparently the genes are activated by the bioelectricity, unquote. That is, what we may be witnessing are electric traces of a bioelectric epigenetic switch that regulates gene expressions or the pattern of where genes are expressed. Wedding bioelectricity to molecular genetics and charged cultural imaginaries from the past with future hopes for regenerative medicine, Levin, the lab's director, delights in playing the errant genius in search of one of life's most profound and promising secrets. As one reporter puts it, in the world where Michael Levin's vision has come to life, people who lose a limb in an accident are able to regrow it. Birth defects can be repaired in the womb. Cancer cells are detected and rendered harmless before they grow tumors. Any number of other diseases are conquered as cells are altered and adjusted. Grow your own, the article's headline, makes an apt motto for the lab, even if this autopoetic framing belies the enormous labors, the patchwork of entangled practices that will be necessary to move towards anything like this futuristic goal. But this futuristic imagery is no doubt imaginary is no doubt currently sparking the interest of a host of potential funders. The next section is called Quantum Phenomena, Entanglements of Disparate Parts. This talk is a patchwork made of disparate parts, or so it may seem. And yet to see the traces of lightning's first inklings is to see something visually akin to the flashings of the electric face to come of the embryonic tadpoles. Both the embryonic becomings of lightning and the lightning face of the embryo exhibit flashes that mark out the traces of what might yet become. Preceding the flash of a lightning bolt and preceding gene involvement in cell differentiation, electrons and photons play at making virtual diagrams, flashes of light painting possibilities across the sky and across an embryo, hinting at things to come. My wager is that these seemingly disparate phenomena are both quantum phenomena, in particular instances of the virtual play of electron-photon interactions that quantum field theory, on my account, tells us are the elemental happenings of electromagnetic phenomena. In other words, these electromagnetic phenomena in their ongoing becoming illuminate an intrinsic feature of materiality itself, matter's ongoing experimenting with itself, the queer dance of time being indeterminacy, the imaginative play of presence, absence, here, there, now, then, that holds the disparate parts together apart. Let's touch on each of these phenomena once again with an eye, wherever that eye is located, to the flashing up of yearnings yet to become. Embryonic lightning. Let me just stop the sound for this video. There we go. Okay. At the U.S. Air Force Atmospheric Research Center in Colorado Springs, Jeff McHargue, an atmospheric physicist, is trying to capture the elusive birth of the lightning bolt. McHargue is using a new generation of super slow motion camera that can record thousands of images per second, visually resolving temporality on unprecedented scales that allow the human eye for the first time to see how very much happens in the flash of an eye. What does embryonic lightning look like? The Discovery Channel's video shows McGarg at his computer terminal replaying the video of his lucky first ever catch of lightning's embryonic electric stirrings before any part of a lightning bolt begins to manifest. What the video shows is a stunning feature of the not yet lightning flashes. The flashes of light do not just head downwards for 50 yards and then change direction and head out again. Rather, one sees erratic, disjointed sets of flashes, tentatively testing out different pathways, the trace of each trial gesture vanishing as quickly as it appears. McGarg, you can see the step leader coming down here, looking for ground, going back and forth. You can see the tortuous channels it's taking as it divides back and forth. Look closely, and you can see that the so-called back and forth motion is really a discontinuous pattern of flashing. It flashes here and then over there, some distance away, and that some of the gestures are upwards rather than downwards. That's something I'm adding to McGarg. That is what McGarg's film seems to have captured is a stepped leader gesturing towards the earth, variously expressing its yearnings. It is important to keep in mind that this is not yet a lightning bolt. Stepped leaders are barely luminous first gestures of a lightning bolt to come. What we are witnessing is the potential face of lightning yet to be born, a discontinuous exploration of different possible pathways before a lightning stroke explodes and shatters the darkness. Lightning expert Martin Ullman points to the fractal-like nature of the stepped leader's musings and attributes this wandering to a kind of electrical confusion. Possibly, various airborne regions of charge divert the leader on its trip. More likely, the leader just doesn't know exactly where it wants to go, except that ultimately it wants to move downwards, unquote. Electrical confusion with fusion yet to come. The electrons are trying out different paths, feeling out this desiring field, exploring its entangled yearnings before any discharge to the ground takes place. These gestures are material imaginings, electrical flirtations signaling connections to come. Lightning is born of discontinuous, spooky, action at a distance signaling in a decidedly queer communication between earth and sky as they each exchange gestures towards the other before either exists, signals of the desiring field that animates their interactive becoming. If this is reminiscent of the indeterminate exploration of the multiple errant pathways of a quantum phenomenon, it may not be that surprising. Lightning is, after all, the luminous activity of strong electromagnetic fields where photons and electrons engage in a quantum exploration of multiple temporalities and polymorphous couplings, the dance of indeterminacy. Now we're going back to the lightning face of an embryo. The electric face phenomenon that Adams caught on video is a blend of the fantastic and the scientific, utterly mesmerizing. We catch the glimpse of a face that does not yet exist, but before we can fully discern its indeterminate features, it is gone in a flash. As Adams describes it, the result is so remarkable and almost doesn't seem real. As cells divide within the ball of the embryo, lines and shapes glow and disappear. A slash where the mouth will form shimmers into view, only to quickly fade away. A dot signaling an eye appears briefly on the left side of the embryo. A moment later, a matching dot flashes on the right. Vertiginous time-lapse photography is a staple of nature documentaries, but this is different. These features, the mouth, the eyes, didn't actually exist. In fact, many of the genes that are linked to the development hadn't yet been turned on. It's only after the patterns fade, the ghost of features yet to come, that all the necessary proteins are activated, unquote. The electric traces of a face flash across the cells of the undifferentiated tadpole embryo and disappear. much like the faint traces of embryonic lightning that tease with the promise of an electrifying connection. The flashes of light that paint out the face of the tadpole offer tantalizing glimpses of what does not yet exist. What we witness are traces of differentiating materializations to come, virtual explorations of making face. Internally generated lightning flashes are coursing through the embryonic body, exploring different possibilities of what might yet be, have been. What I'm suggesting by drawing on quantum field theoretic imagery to describe this event is that what Adams captured is in fact a quantum feature of the biophysical epigenetic phenomenon she and her colleagues have been studying, the material play of indeterminacy, the teasing gestures of what might yet be, have been. If my conjecture is correct, it places regeneration as a phenomenon within the emerging field of quantum biology. The stunning nature of this example is that what it shows is not merely quantum mechanical effects that scientists now believe account for photosynthesis, bird navigation, and olfactory function, but quantum field theoretic effects, like virtual explorations of what might yet materialize or what might yet have been, as an integral part of ongoing processes of materialization in the dynamic play of indeterminacies in being time. The sky and the frog embryo, like the quantum field theory void, are having brain flashes, imagining all matter of becomings. In their material imaginings, they are trying on different faces, identities, being, electrical patternings of differential mattering in an undoing of self. Experiments in virtuality, the flashing up of other time beings, explorations of possible transmaterialities are integral to what matters. We come now to the final section. Trans-matter realities and queer political imaginaries. The promise of monsters is a regenerative politics, an invitation to explore new ways of being in touch, new forms of becoming, new possibilities for kinship, alliance, and change. Regeneration is not about fixing or making whole what has been lost. Rather, understood as a quantum phenomenon, regeneration brings indeterminacy's radical potential to the fore. The indeterminacy of time being means that matter, materiality, is a matter of material wanderings, a virtual exploration of what might yet be, have been, dispersed across space-time being, and condensed into each material bit, here now. Every morsel, even the smallest bit of space-time mattering. The past is not past, and the future is not what will simply unfold. Being is not a matter of the given, and loss is not an empty abyss, an absence to be filled in and restored with presence. What is at issue is a hauntology, where memory, the pattern of sedimented enfoldings of iterative interactivity, is written into the fabric of the world. The world holds the memory of all traces, or rather, the world is its memory. And rememberings are infinite in their possibilities, returnings to what might yet have been. The virtual is not a set of individual possibilities, one of which might yet be realized or actualized. Virtual possibilities are not what is absent relative to the real's presence. They are not the roads not taken or some yet unrealized potential future, the other to actual lived reality. The virtual in its inseparability is a superposition of possibilities, energetic throbs of the nothingness, material forces of creativity and generativity. Virtual possibilities are material explorations that are integral to what matter is. Matter is not the given, the unchangeable, the bare facts of nature. It is not inanimate, lifeless, eternal. Matter is an imaginative material exploration of being, non-being, creatively regenerative and ongoing transformation. This is an experimental piece with a political investment in unleashing an energetics of the otherwise, exploding the bounds and bindings of oppressive forms of thought, and opening up an infinity of possibilities, yearnings to become, matters of touching and being in touch, errant wanderings of matter. Every bit, every moment of everydayness, an implosion of an infinity of possibilities. Imaginaries that undermine oppressive systems of thought founded on binaries of culture, nature, human, non-human, space, time, individual, creative, as well as foundational ontological commitments to individualism and concordant notions of kind and property, which are the bedrock for racialized capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, gender oppression, and much more in their entanglements. Imagining is not the outside of materiality, but rather materiality is shot through with the imaginary. Not imaginaries of some future or elsewhere to arrive at or to be achieved as the political goal, but rather imaginaries with material existences in the thick now of the present. Imaginaries that are attuned to the condensations of past and future alive in each moment. Imaginaries that entail superpositions of many beings and times, multiple possibilities that coexist and are iteratively, interactively reconfigured. Imaginaries that are material explorations of indeterminacy's dynamism, of all matter of yearnings to become otherwise, communal, differentiating entanglings alive in the here now. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks so much, Professor Barad, for this beautiful and inspiring talk, which brings together so many important concepts such as materiality, imagining, and virtuality, and so many more. So I have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, this is not my. I'm not in position to ask the questions at all. So please do ask your own questions or make your own comments to you people in the room. As I said, if you feel like asking a question or making a comment, as I said, please inform me on chat, in chat that you want to do it. And as I said, if you don't feel like talking, do type in your own question, and I'll read it aloud. So we'll have approximately half an hour for the Q&A session. And go. Here I have the note from Katarzyna Ferwon-Chorawa. Do you want to ask the question yourself, or do you want me to ask it? That's not. Oh, okay. Continue.
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm really greatly moved by the talk. Thank you, Karen. I'm writing a doctoral thesis on aesthetics, and I'm working on using agential realism for aesthetics. And the talk you have just given right now really moves me, because somehow you never say anything about the aesthetics of agency, but somehow for me, from my perspective, and I'm a philosopher and artist, it is very close. Well, and it's close to my research. So maybe you can comment very broadly on what I have just said. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Very open-ended, of course. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have talked a bit about with regard to aesthetics, and I agree with you that I think this talk very much does speak to questions of aesthetics and politics. But I have spoken some about poetics, and in particular, I've commented some about the difference in my writing styles between my discussions of quantum mechanics, as in the presentation given in Meeting the Universe Halfway, and the writings that start with a documented piece. Was the first time I braved talking about quantum field theory, which is actually the subject matter of my own research project in physics. And for me, you know, the writing is much more poetic. And the need for poetics in talking about quantum field theory. So I just want to say something about need, first of all, with regard to that, which is that I wasn't seeking to use poetics, but I felt grabbed by poetics itself in trying to give expression to some of what my agential realist sensing of what quantum field theory is about. There was no way to try to give expression to the vacuum and how the vacuum speaking silence in a more prosaic form. That if quantum mechanics, I've used this way of talking about, if quantum mechanics was like trying to talk about that was like hugging the trunk of a tree as you climb it, quantum field theory felt more to me like being out on the very leafy parts of branches, kind of dangling like a silkworm over the void, in terms of, the very difference of trying to, what does it mean to try to speak the insensible within the sensible and the insensibility that surrounds the sensible. So, so I think aesthetics are essential to, really expanding our senses of how to sense and what sensing is about, which is very much the unifying theme, if I can say that, of this talk. So thank you for your rich, open-ended questions.
Thank you. It encourages me to go on with my study. And I just, perhaps not to take too much time for other questions, I want to say that, yes, for me, you inspired me to think of sensitivity as such, and sensitivity in aesthetics through agential realism, very open. And thank you very much for encouragement.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to reading your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Are there any other, I'm sure there are other questions and comments, expressions of
silence
feelings.
is also okay, because it's part of the goings on here. So
Dorota Łagoska wants to break the silence.
Thank you so much for this very inspiring lecture. And for me as an art historian, it also inspired me mostly in the aesthetical field. And when I was watching different images that you showed, and maybe especially the lightenings, I couldn't escape the connection with so many visual artworks. And I was thinking about this creative agency of nature, and also how this the aesthetics of nature can contribute to the artistic value, and how actually nature has artistic value and is an artist itself. But also, like, I know nothing about quantum physics, but from what I understood, it's mostly non-visible. All those processes you were talking about going on with the electrons are invisible, basically. But I thought that there is a potential for visual arts, and I cannot yet exactly explain what I mean, but I sense the connection between non-visible and the visual, and how it somehow has some creative power. So, you know, that's basically some random thoughts inspired when I was listening to you. And if you could say anything more about this creative agency of nature and the processes that you were talking about, those invisible processes, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, questions of the play between the visible and the invisible, and also a kind of questioning of what is the line between what we assume is the visible and the invisible. So I'll give you a sense of what I mean by that. So, you know, the development of technologies, for example, with Professor McHarg, who was using this very high-speed camera to catch what had previously been invisible in the blink of an eye, and really then being able to bring it to visuality. Or what Danny Adams does in terms of training her microscope on the embryo overnight, and then developing it through computer processing and everything to stabilize the image, and then making that video through a succession of stills. So bringing to light things that we assume can only inhabit the realm of the invisible, as if there is such a realm. So part of what is at stake here is the question of what is visuality? What does visuality itself entail? And is visuality even its own sense? Or do we have something like synesthesia? Because in an important sense, as I suggested in my writings on touching, all sensing is touching in a sense, when what we call the visual is when photons caress our eyes. And so there is what's happening here, I think is also a troubling of the very dichotomy between the visible and the invisible. And this kind of glimpses of what yet isn't even there. You know, the temporality of this is so fantastically interesting because there's this indeterminacy in what I call time being. So what is flashing up is here in the here now, is the flashings up of the past, of what we might call the past and the future. So including what might yet have been, but also, as you could see, the ghostly images in the frog embryo of what might yet be, but might not. So there's an interesting question here then of the whole dynamism of the creativity of the material world in and of itself. That is so far beyond anything like some, straight conception of materiality. Because here, when we're talking about a different aesthetics, we're talking about, an aesthetics of, how should I put it? I mean, there's, there isn't necessarily a creator of processes, right? The creativity is happening through each of us, right? Through the cells, through the sky. So along with agency, it's not something that's held and an agents that there are different agents, but that there is agency flowing through, flashing up. In this dynamism, this play of indeterminacy, it offers us some very ways of querying our usual thinking about that. So thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. And I see so much potential for the artists to work with this, because there is bioart becoming more and more popular when artists cooperate with scientists. But I think this field of quantum physics has not yet been explored enough by artists.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dorota, and thanks, Karen, for the response. We have a whole line now of people. So without much further ado, let's Maria Romanova ask her question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Thank you, Professor Barad, for the talk. I have many questions. But in my own work, I'm trying to formulate an idea of environmental memory, specifically looking at objects such as permafrost. Although, of course, my project is ongoing. And I was really curious about the fact that you ended the talk on, many different rhizomes of ideas, but one of them was memory. As you said, that memory is written into the fabric of the world. So remembering is literally a material process. So like, as we lose things, the present and the past are kind of, materially interacting in some capacity. And I guess in this case, I was thinking of, within this context, I was thinking of agency of escaping beyond the memory. Because in the case of, for example, permafrost thaw, as it thaws, essentially, creates a carbon feedback loop, right? So that there's a kind of urgency and danger in remembering, essentially, right? Or like attempting to, and as we see, New Yorker articles popping up, the idea of like all these mammoth tasks that come back to literally haunt us, in a kind of material way. And so I guess I'm thinking, what if the haunting, like memory, comes back to haunt us in a way that destroys the ongoing formulation of memory and disrupts a kind of mattering that is ongoing, right? Because we continue to matter and continue to create matter. And I guess then I was thinking of like interaction between past and present that temporarily is disruptive in some capacity, right? So there is a kind of material, because I think that, you correct me if I'm wrong, but your talk ends on a very sort of positive note. And I was wondering, what is the role of agency in terms of remembering, memory and mattering? And that's not a very well formulated question, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on those concepts. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, lots to sit and talk about. That's already in your question. If I could just gesture towards another kind of paper that I've given in other talks, where I've talked a lot about the violence within physics, as well as the different possibilities that I'm trying to bring forward as well, are the forms of violence. And among those, I've spoken quite a bit about the atom bomb, which is very much a part of quantum field theory as well. It's part of that inheritance. And in there, I've talked a lot about remembering, and with regard to something called the quantum eraser experiment. And this is very important to get a sense of what I mean about the fact that the world is its memory, and the sense in which I mean that. And I'll just say something about remembering, and the way I use returning or reconfiguring, or maybe even in the title of this conference, in the rethinking, or in this paper about regeneration, is not a going back. It's not a going back to what was, but it's a turning it over and over again. It's an iterative re-engagement. So that you can see in the example of the frog, the eye on that actually can see on the frog's back. Okay, it is not a return to the normal. It's not this kind of, I really appreciate the possibilities here in terms of crypt politics, disability justice questions as well, because it's not simply a return. It's not about fixing the body in its normality in the way that, you know, we see as part of the imaginary of Michael Levin, for example, but rather the radical possibilities of remembering otherwise, right? So in its materiality, which is not to dismiss either questions of the past, so the past and what has happened, okay? But that has to be, this has to be treated because in a certain kind of way, because there's this sedimenting of this iterative reconfigurings that you can see in permafrost, right? That makes permafrost what permafrost is, and the way in which it traps certain things and is, you know, freezing them in the past, as it were. And what does it mean to then allow to come forward in the present or in the near future, as we would say, of, you know, of something from the past, and how that troubles our sensibility. But I think that in order, so what I'm gesturing towards here is a need to really move away from a certain kind of sequential notion of time, from the past having been, the past being over, and the future what will unfold from the present, that there's this sequence of moments, what Walter Benjamin calls beads on a string, beads on the rosary, right? That, you know, instead of this progressivist notion of time, what is being opened up here is the possibility for, and the necessity really, of rethinking temporality and taking it outside of its sequential sensibility, and henceforth rethinking the very notion of what memory is and what remembering might entail.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. A lot to think about.
Thank you.
It is indeed. There are four electronic hands in the air, and four electric faces. But there's one question in the chat that I'll read very quickly from Saika Chakraborty. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. The question concerns the possible links between what you were talking about when discussing vacuum that is not so much empty but buzzing with potential virtuality, and Derrida's notion of the chora. So I'm passing this question to you as a and I ask you to elaborate on that if possible.
So that's a very big question also. I've written some things in relation to Derrida's work, just to point to a paper in Derrida today, I forget what year that was, but on quantum, on a hauntology, basically, on Derrida's notion of a hauntology. And, you know, so I think the whole question of the trace actually is super interesting with regard to the question of the virtual. But I'm also aware that we're coming up against a certain time limit, as it were. And so if I can just shorthand an answer there, I apologize for not going more into it at this point. This is what, you know, as wonderful as it is to appear in this kind of way, because people can come from everywhere. One of the things that, of course, is missing is the closeness and possibilities that happen in conferences after the talk, and you can really sit and talk with people. Yeah, trying to do my best here.
We all miss that. So quickly, Irene Brunati, please.
Hi, thank you. Actually, this is my colleague Elena. I'm Lara, presenting together the conference.
Okay,
thank
sorry.
you. No, you couldn't know because of the naming. Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I'm actually coming from a corner of socio and applied linguistics, and I'm very much intrigued by your thoughts on how language has been given too much power, and also on how you use words. And we've also been looking into the metaphorics a lot. And I have this thought that I would like to think words without language. And I don't know, I'm just wondering if that is possible and what that means, and if you have any thoughts on that. And then I've also noticed that you use expression a lot. You give expression to. Now, I assume, or we've been thinking, it's probably to distance yourself somehow from representing, describing. So I was wondering also, what does the expression do differently from the other things? Yeah, thank you.
Very, very, very rich question. That's lovely. Another opportunity to sit and have coffee would be great. So yeah, the notion that words are somehow like in thought bubbles above our head is something I've been, you know, working hard to displace. And because representationalism has really limited thinking in very profound ways. And so even rethinking the notion of the concept, which is what I consider to be so radical actually about the work of Niels Bohr, because he was really saying concepts are not these ideas, right? They're not just words that point to things. They are material arrangements of the world, or at least that's how I read him, and then run with that about concepts in their materiality. When it comes to quantum field theory, even that kind of thinking has to be pushed even further. And so again, it's like these questions of the speaking silence of the vacuum, okay, of the nothingness. In the Documenta piece, I do this thing about, you know, different sounds coming forward, but being cross-cut before they're heard. Or the similar kind of thing we could say about different symbols showing up on the blank page, and so on. And so what is happening here, I sense my own sensibility and my own desire to express also gets cross-cut before I can actually say what I want to say, but it's something about that yearning that I'm trying to, you know, put forward and open up other possibilities of what that is that I shorthand by giving expression. I'm very intrigued by what you say. I saw you guys on the program. I'll see if I can attend. I'm very intrigued by this notion of having words outside of language, as it were, outside a certain linguistic structure and logics of that, I imagine is what you mean. So yeah. Now I just want to sit back and listen to you guys, but thanks for the opportunity to begin this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We'd be very excited to see you.
Thank you. And Cinzia Orlando now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Your presentation was beautiful. And I want you to ask, like, I'm now existentially struggling with responsibility, and not in an anxious way, but just in a curious way. And this is a absolutely not formulated thought, but listening to you, I was thinking that I think there is a link, but I don't know which one, between the problem of responsibility and on one side, the problem of scales of our own scales. And on the other side,
okay.
Yeah, and on the other side, with what you say, with this imaginary in the thick, in its presence. And the other day I was listening to a speech from Avery Gordon, who was talking about Locke and the idea of marginal utopias, and this idea of utopia that is not just like an impossible future, but is something thick, present. And I don't know, I think that this idea of imaginary and utopia really challenged the idea of responsibility. And I just want to hear your opinion, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I haven't studied Bloch in much detail yet, and I really like to sink into certain theorists before I comment. I know more of Bloch through Jose Munoz's work than I do from Bloch himself, although I have been engaged with the work of Walter Benjamin and have written about Walter Benjamin's work, and they were in conversation, of course, with one another. So I don't know enough about what Bloch has said about the question of responsibility. What I've gestured towards here is the importance of understanding the fact that there are these various possibilities that are not about coming to fruition of a future in the front, that's out in front. So, so this is a way that I think that, our approaches might be resonant with one another, and one of the reasons why Bloch is on my reading list. But I don't understand a priori why it would be going against responsibility. Just to say very quickly that responsibility, as I've inherited it by activists on the street, the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, in conversation with my colleague Donna Haraway, my former student who's a wonderful professor, Astrid Schrader, is about the ability to respond, but it is not, so it's about allowing response, if we will. And being responsible is absolutely crucial, I think, because entanglements themselves, in the ways that I've written about it, are about inheritance of what we inherit. And I think, therefore, it's absolutely, that's my engagement with the atomic bomb, for example, taking responsibility, allowing for other responses to come through, disrupting and looking at being with, staying with the trouble, as my colleague Donna Haraway would say, is absolutely a crucial part to the politics of the here now, or what Benjamin calls Jetztzeit, the thick now of the present. And so, again, this would have to be another conversation to hear more about, how you're thinking with Block and what the problem of responsibility is there. I'm sorry, I don't know how to directly respond to it yet.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I didn't want to say that it was against responsibility, just that it invite us to think responsibility in a different way. And thank you very much for your answer.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No, I used like the wrong verb. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
There seems to be a lot of virtual conversations springing from this big Yet site. And I wish they could all got actualized. But we have to move forward. There's one more question in electric hand and one more in chat. Is it okay, Karen, if we go a little bit longer than expected so that everybody gets their possibility to ask the questions? Okay, so Deborah Hart, please ask your question.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've actually met you in Switzerland, and it's wonderful to be in this conference with you. I'm very excited. And I am actually working on my dissertation, and I'm theorizing about captive animal violence when captives kill their captors. Mm-hmm. And I am looking at it through the framework of agential realism. And I'm curious, or would like to ask you, is this a viable interpretation?
I mean, I don't know where you're going with it, so.
I guess to talk about using it, you mentioned in your book that there are different possibilities for reworking material discursive apparatuses of bodily production, including but not limited to acts of subversion, resistance, opposition, and revolution, which I found inspiring. So I'm basically talking about animals. What is the mechanism that's happening when they kill their captors in circuses or zoos, etc.? And I'm looking at it as an act of revolution that is a temporary reversal of sovereignty in the end.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. Again, it would be lovely to hear more. We have to be back up in the Alps or something. Just to say also that one of the things I've also written about is the way in which indeterminacy is an undoing of captivity. Because of course, when we speak of captivity, we can't also not think of human captivity, enslavement, forced labor, and many, many other things. I think my dog is trying to get into my, the dean had promised that animals would be present. So she's been captive in the other room, and I think she's trying to get in now, speaking of that, but I hear her snorting at my door. At any rate, sorry, but just to come back to your question, we would, need to talk much more, but it sounds very interesting what you're doing, just beginning to riff with you. But yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks. And we have one more, I guess, one last question, which presents itself as a simple one. I'm not here to judge, because the question reads simply, how to think materiality without essentialism?
Okay, yeah, I think, and thank you for bringing that to the fore, but I think that that's exactly what I'm showing in the paper today, is that there's an undoing of the very notion of essence in what materiality itself is doing to itself, in an undoing of self, and an undoing of kind, and an undoing of property. So we start out with something that's supposed to be in contemporary ontology, right, of particle physics, particles with well-defined properties, with well-defined kinds, a kind of exemplification of essence, right, of the very essence of what the world is made up of. And what I'm showing here is that there's a precisely an undoing of essence, of kind, of property, in this way in which alterity is always already within. There is no self. There is no self without the other. There is no self without others, not only all the others that we can think of around us, but also all the others of the past and of the future as well. So that an electron is not a teeny weeny dot. That's part of what is going on here. And that's what I've also been trying to bring forward, even with quantum mechanics, that it's inseparable from the apparatuses of bodily production. And we see also the ways in which, in its own engagement with itself, through the interactions with the vacuum as well, these kinds of notions of essence are being interrogated by the very notion of essence itself, if you will.
Yeah, if I may allude to your own formulation, that the self-touch is the encounter with, if I remember correctly, with the infinite alterity of the self. This is exactly how I understand your thought, that what we're encountering here is a reopening of the concept of matter and going beyond the concept of identity and the essence. So with this reopening, we have also reopened and opened for good the conference, which is going to rethink the very notion of agency, and I think it's a pretty good start, if I may say so. So thank you once again, Professor Barad, for being with us today, and for your generosity in responding to all the questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for all the wonderful questions. Really appreciate them. They've been really terrific questions. And thank you for everybody who's hung in there. So.
Thank you, and I'm moving the microphone back to Pavel.
Thank you very, very much for this very insightful and also a very poetic talk, Karen. I want also to thank Adam for the wonderful moderation of this part of the conference, and of course all the people who asked questions and took part in the discussion after this keynote talk. Karen, I'm looking forward to our further cooperation, and we stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Yes, now we will close today's meeting. Thank you very much for the presence and that you have attended this meeting, and we will proceed tomorrow beginning at 9 a.m. Central European time in 7 thematic questions. All coordinators of the sections have informed you about the way how you have to register and enter the rooms where you will be invited to present your presentations and to listen to the talks of others. If you have any questions, please feel free to write emails to me and to all coordinators of the sections. At 5 p.m. Central European Time, we kindly invite you to our accompanying event organized and coordinated by Professor Gerardo Beltrán Cejudo and Professor Julia Fedorchuk as part of the EcoPod Politological Laboratory, which is carried out within this research project. We use tomorrow one link for all events, for all meetings. So for the panels and for this accompanying event of the EcoLab as well. Yes, so much from me. I wish you a pleasant day or a peaceful evening, and let us see each other tomorrow. Thank you very much.